All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will call our meeting to order. This is the House Study Committee on Professional Licensure, Board Operations and Funding. This is our first meeting, our organizational meeting, if you will. And to begin, I'm going to ask if Representative Laricchio will open us in a word of prayer. And you said 23, I believe. Thank you, Representative Laricchio. Let's see if we can get this microphone working right. Rick, you're number 24? Just test that mic.
Test. I'm on.
There it is.
All right. As we begin, I'm going to ask each one of us to introduce ourselves and just give you an idea of any licenses that we may hold. As I mentioned, this is going to be our kind of our organizational opening meeting. It's our intention today to hear from our state partners, representatives of Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Commission, GORC, as well as the Business License Division of our Secretary of State's office. We'll be taking no industry or public testimony at today's hearing. We will have that at future meetings. So don't feel like you're left out. You will not be left out, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for input at a future time. But today's meeting is going to hear from an overview from our state partners on the issue of professional licensure, our boards, and fees, and so forth. With that, Representative Williams, if I recognize you, if you will just give a brief overview of your service.
I'm Representative Rick Williams from Milledgeville, Baldwin County, and Putnam County. I do hold state license as a funeral director and embalmer, a funeral home and cemetery pre-need dealer.
Dominic Laricchio from down in District 169, Coffee County, Bacon County, and Jeff Davis County. We are Sunbelt Termite and Pest Control, but we are licensed and regulated under the Department of Agriculture. But Sunbelt, where serving people is who we are and killing bugs is what we do, in case any of you need. But look forward to serving on the committee.
I'm Representative Jody Lott from District 122, that is Columbia County, Georgia, and Evans near Augusta. I have been a registered nurse for 24 years, so licensed with the Secretary of State's office with that, and multiple business licenses just to use that entity as well.
Thank you. I'm Representative Brett Harrell. I represent a portion of Gwinnett County in the 106th District. I hold no state license under the Secretary of State's office, although in years past I have passed the State Real Estate Board, never activated that license, the Property and Casualty Insurance Board, and never activated that license, and was once even registered with the Securities Exchange Commission as an investment advisor and never activated that license. So I have had some experience going through that process, but don't hold any current license under the state of Georgia. We will be joined shortly by Representative Karen Bennett from Stone Mountain, and she is caught in another issue we face in Georgia in traffic. But as soon as she arrives, we'll have her introduce herself as well. Did we have a representative from OPB come in this morning? Oh yeah, thank you. If you wouldn't mind come forward. What as the agenda indicated today, we kind of want to look at hear from our state partners and have a little bit of discussion with them about the current regulatory environment, and will give us kind of a better foundation of how to move forward as we then hear from the industry and the public about various issues here. We're joined this morning. Let's see if I can get that. Did we decide that was a table mic that worked? Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
If you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself, the GORC process, if you will. I know it's attached to you, and I guess I should say at the beginning, for those that aren't aware, all of our state partners that participate on the GORC Council, this is not their primary job. They all have full-time primary focus doing other things in the state of Georgia, important other things in the state of Georgia. And so this is an additional added responsibility that has been tasked to these individuals. So we start out by recognizing that and appreciate the work that you're doing all day, every day for our state, and then recognize that this is an added responsibility which poses some additional challenges. So if you would, for the audience and for the commission, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and giving us a brief overview of the council.
Absolutely. Teresa McCartney, I'm the OPB Director and the State Chief Financial Officer. And GORC is, as you indicated, attached. Absolutely. Is that better? Okay. As you indicated, it's part of OPB, and as the OPB Director, I'm the chair, and I get to designate, if I do not sit as the chair of the committee, then I get to designate someone to sit on the committee for me. My understanding is GORC was established in 1986, and since then we have performed about 43 reports from the different business and licenses, and there's about 80 different professional or business licenses that we provide in the state. I'm going to really just kind of focus on since 2011 under this governor's administration. Since then, I'll be the first one to admit that we really have not probably done the extent of the reviews that we should have been doing, so I will say that up front. And since 2011, we did a review almost every single year. So in 2014, we looked at the Accountancy Board, and as you know, that was part of also Secretary of State, and based on the review and the legislation that passed, we moved that and attached it administratively to the the State Accounting Office. We also did a review of looking at roofing contractors. That was done in 2013. It was not recommended to do a licensure for the contractors, and legislation did not pass. In 2013, we also looked at lactation consultants. I will tell you that based on the review, it was not recommended for licensing. However, the legislation did pass in 2016 to regulate lactation consultants. In 2016, another review was done on durable medical equipment. Also, it was recommended not to provide licensures on that group. However, legislation did pass in 2017 to start licensing that entity. In 2017, also, we did a review on genetic counselors. It was recommended to actually provide licensing for that group. However, legislation has not passed since doing the review. This summer, we have tackled 3 different reviews. We are in the process of finalizing those reviews and providing the information to the General Assembly. We did a review of foresters, auctioneers, and librarians. I will tell you the letters should go out today. We are not recommending any changes to any of those licensing. We're asking the legislature to hold those. The only thing that really came out of the reviews is really around the librarians of potentially recommending a background check. In 2010, it's my understanding that legislation passed to require the GORC review to do a 7-year review of all licensures. The reality is, and I think you did a great job emphasizing this, just based on resources and 1,000 other things that are on our plates, we have not really done that. And it's really a function of coming out of the Great Recession and this legislation passing, new administration coming in, and then also the other thing that was added to our table, which was extraordinarily time-consuming, was zero-based budgeting. We also started that, and that's really been our focus at OPB versus the GORC. And it's really driven based on staffing within the agency. And when I say this, we're no different than any other agency that we're having to, we're being asked to do more with less staff. Prior to the Great Recession, we had about 80-something employees at OPB. We are down to 44 employees. And so again, it's just a function of trying to prioritize and get 1,000 things off our plate. The one thing I will say, based on the last 6 years of working with the Gort Council and looking at the reviews, and this just from my viewpoint, is probably the council's a little too rigid. In the code section, it stipulates who sits on the council, and as you can imagine, these licensings hit every single sector, and sometimes it could be difficult finding someone within DNR to be able to sit on a review for lactation. So I think one recommendation, if you're looking at changes to the code section, is to provide a little more flexibility on who sits on the reviews, and that may actually open up for us to be able to do more reviews in a timely manner. Given that we have to go back to the same agencies every single time, it gets a little difficult. I will stop there and answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you so much, and we absolutely are here to hear your recommendations. It's, if I'm not incorrect, the same author authored the zero-based budgeting statute as authored the 7-year review statute. So, perhaps could have considered staffing at that time. I have read a number of the reports, nowhere near the totality of the work you've done, and I personally have found them very valuable. As a legislator, we often are tasked with making these decisions and things that we're often unfamiliar with, especially the specifics and the details. So the review work that you've done, I have found valuable and appreciate, which from my personal perspective means that I would prefer to that can have those updates to continue to have. So I think I would be interested in one of your recommendations clearly is, or one of your concerns raised clearly is just the staffing and the rigid nature. But if we are to continue as we are today, what are those things that you think are necessary to get on that a more routine schedule? And then on a routine schedule, which might allow for more in-depth reporting as well. For example, I guess as you mentioned, you're about to issue a report on the librarians or forestry, and I read some of the minutes online, but I presume those minutes and that draft letter, in your estimation, that's the result of this 7-year update on that industry?
Yes, sir. And what we try to do is look across the U.S. and see what other states are licensing. Giving an example of librarians, what we found is that most of the states do not license, but when we worked with the review committee, they really felt strongly that regardless of what's happening nationally, that we should continue it in the state. I do think opening up and allowing some flexibility of who sits on the council will help on the workload, that we're not going to the same agencies every single time. I would also recommend, potentially opening up and having the House Budget Office, the Senate Budget Office also be part of the process. Because again, more transparency and the more people at the table, I think always ends up with the best result. Staffing is always going to be a concern. The reality is, even in OPB, our staff turns over, and we have very high turnover. And so again, we're constantly having to retrain. I'm not sure we'll ever get around that because of just salary issues and just the nature of the job. So I'm not going to say that putting additional staff at OPB is really the right answer. It's really just providing flexibility of who can sit on the committee and letting us tap into different resources.
And last question for me, then I'll open it to the other members so as I don't monopolize all your time. But have you found, so on these commissions, typically there's a legislator as well?
Mm-hmm.
Delicate question, I guess. Have you found that the legislators assigned for a particular review, is it because of the author of the bill? Is it because they're interested in the industry? Are they truly, independent of what an outcome might be one way or the other? Or I guess the simple question, do you see any bias from the legislative input into the final product of the council, if you can say?
Honestly, I haven't really seen any bias in the legislators that have sit on the committee, and it's obviously a number of participate in the licensing that we're looking at, but I don't think that's a bad thing because they're very knowledgeable and they understand the day-to-day of what it means to be a nurse or what it means to be an auctioneer, which I think is very helpful to have them at the table. I think all of the legislators that I've dealt with have been very open-minded and willing to have conversations and to put everything on the table and work with the group to get to the best outcome at the end.
Very good. Members of the committee have any questions for Ms. McCartney? Representative LaRicchia, I think you're 22.
You mentioned, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that someone looked at whether or not to license roofing contractors.
I was done in
And,
2013.
Now, and I think you said that they decided no. So I'm just trying to learn as much as possible about this entire committee's responsibility for what we're going to do moving forward. So this is more a question just kind of to help get my mind right about how this all happens. But who initiates a review or the proposal or looking at licensing roofing contractors? I mean, that's a 200 or 300-year-old job in the world or longer. And so in 2000 and whatever, we decide to look at it to license them. Where does that come from?
The legislature. So the legislature
Through like
asked us to
A
do-
resolution or just a leader in the legislature just says, hey, look at this? I mean, what is the written process of what initiates someone looking at making someone get licensed?
I would have to go back and look at the 2013 around the roofing, but it could be multiple things. It could be a request coming in from a chairman asking us to do a review. It could be that a legislation was dropped to require a different industry to do a licensing, and then again, that chairman of the legislature comes to us and asks us to do a review before they look at passing it. And then the third one is the OPB director. We start looking at the current licensing that we currently do, and then we try to decide which ones that we can review to see if we should continue. So it comes multiple directions.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up. So back to the librarian one. You mentioned that someone is looking into requiring that librarians be licensed.
So we already license librarians,
Okay,
and we've licensed them for many, 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 many years. And so we looked at, should we continue licensing? And based on the review and looking at what their job function is and how they interact with the public and looking at their specialty, looking at what's happening across the 50 other states, they're recommending no changes to that, to continue to license.
And they mentioned that that they wanted to continue that regardless of what the rest of the nation's doing, as far as most of them do
Correct.
not license.
Correct. The only
Librarians.
thing that they had a pretty robust conversation around, and Chairman Jack Hill sat on this review, was potentially looking at requiring some background checks, just again, given the population, citizens coming in and children into libraries. But we're working on getting that final report done.
You could do background checks without requiring licenses, though, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, thank you so much.
Representative Lott.
Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate that. So I think currently in code, it's listed as every 7 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that a reasonable period of time for the number of boards that we have? It'd
probably helpful to have a longer time frame. Again, based on experience when we go in and look and do the reviews of if we can continue to keep licensing. A majority of the time, it always comes back that we will continue to license. So again, I'm just not sure how helpful the 7-year review will be. But again, I will also give the caveat, we have not been doing it to the extent we should.
So a little more flexibility in that as well, and just give you some room to be able to move as the requests come in.
That would, absolutely.
And I should know the answer to this because I actually think I printed this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how is this board set up? I know that you were commenting on there's a legislator involved, but is it a stable, consistent board that does all of these reviews, or is there?
It's 9 members,
Okay.
and the reality is it's mostly agency heads or their designee. So it is the comptroller, which is the executive director of the state accounting office, secretary of state, commissioner for public health, OPB director, commissioner of DNR, the state Department of Revenue commissioner, Department of Agriculture commissioner, and then the chairman of the legislative committee who referred, or the person's designee from that committee. So that's what I was really emphasizing. It is a very rigid approach, and it's the same agencies that are legally required to sit on this review. And the reality is a lot of these agencies do not have the expertise around the licensing that we're looking at. When we did the ones this summer, I did call all the agency heads and commissioners and asked, instead of having the same person sit on all 3 reviews, if they could designate a different person. So again, to make sure that we can get people to attend and be able to provide the reports. As you can only imagine, sometimes we have difficulty of getting some of the agencies to attend, and I get it, because we're asking agencies to do 1,000 things, and
Right.
there's only so many hours in a day.
May I continue? Sure. Is the 9-person committee, does that seem like that gives you enough, those that can't show, those that will show up for this committee hearing and review, does that give you what you need if we have?
I think you can go probably a little bigger, but again, I wouldn't go too large, because anytime when you get a large group, sometimes it's very difficult to get things done and be able to produce a document within a timely manner, but 9's probably a little small. But again, if you opened up and had some flexibility on who could serve on the committee, that may actually help and solve a lot of our issues.
And so if we did give you that flexibility on who was going to come, they probably would show up because they would be impacting their own knowledge base and their own
Absolutely.
field or their own certifications. But so my last question, I apologize, I keep going here, but when you do a review and we have legislation, do you come to the committees when we are reviewing the bills and report the findings of court? I know that I'm a little embarrassed to even say it, but that we just licensed 2 that you said not to. What? I don't know what to say about that.
And I'll be honest, I have not come to a committee after we've done a review and presented to a committee, but I haven't been asked. But we always do provide, once we've done a review, we provide the information to the committee, to the legislators who sat on it and who has requested it. And again, I'll be sending the letter out today to around the 3 that we did this summer. I don't think, and again, I'll put blame on me as the OPB director, because we didn't do what legally we were required to do. But again, it would have been very difficult for us to be able to do all these reviews, just given, again, the time frame and zero-based budgeting. I mean, we're required to do 10% of all programs every year, and it's hard.
Sure.
The other recommendation I would give is I don't think it has to be the OPB director as the chair. I think you can even open up that too. I think it's great to have OPB on the committee, but I think we can spread the love there too. And I'm sure the group behind me will agree with that.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. You said they refused to license or didn't see the need to license roofing contractors.
That was based on the report.
Now, that wouldn't come under the heading of general contractor?
I would have to go back and look at the report,
It's,
unless someone in the audience can answer for me.
you know, you've got plumbing contractors, you've got landscape contractor, electrical contractor. Roofing is, if anyone's ever had a house built and they put the shingles on wrong, you've got some issues, and there's nobody to go back to on that. So people could just get a hammer and a ladder and a box of nails and call themselves a roofing contractor and just be unregulated.
Again, I would have to go back and read the report, but based on the committee that looked at it in 2013, they did not recommend licensing for it.
Could we get a copy of that report?
Absolutely, be
Thank
happy to
you.
provide it.
Another question? So your 9-member committee oversees all of these state examining boards? I mean, the licensure?
To do the reviews.
To do
yes.
the reviews, okay. And make recommendations as to what to do and not to do?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yet they thought it was necessary to have a lactation? Was that part of theirs, or was that through
We did not.
legislature?
We or they? We or they?
Yeah,
Okay,
the
the
legislature-
legislature did that,
Yes, sir.
Okay. okay.
So
Thank
again,
you.
it goes both ways, where the committee has recommended things and the legislature chose not to do it, and vice versa, where they've
Okay.
recommended not to do something and the legislature moved forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
But I would say that happens with everything that we do. It's give and take.
Just to wrap up, Ms. McCartney, and let me also, with your full-time job, congratulate you. You've been recognized nationally for the work that you've done for the state of Georgia, and it's an outstanding job. And we really appreciate all that you have done for our citizens and your tenure there at OPB. You've been an outstanding director of that department. The GORC reviews, when a bill is introduced to license an as yet unlicensed profession, is the GORC review statutorily mandatory?
I believe so, but let me go back and read the code section because I don't want to tell you wrong.
And again, once the review is completed, the GORC report is a recommendation. So the legislature is
Still
free
has to
to
act.
accept or reject and either license or not a particular industry.
Absolutely.
Okay,
We're just providing a recommendation for the legislature to use as a guide.
right. So, and I'll have to go back and review too, but I believe that the report, as you suggest, probably is a requirement that on a new unlicensed, that it ought to be written. But again, you and your other nine members are doing your day jobs, and bills are being thrown in right and left. And is it generally the responsibility of either an author or a committee chair to notify you when a bill has been thrown in and assigned to a particular committee that, hey, this is a new request for a new licensure, and then that would trigger you calling the group together to perform your function? So I think some of what, and Ms. McCartney was very clear to say, hey, we haven't done the 7-year reviews as often as we should. And a lot of this is I think we need to recognize is on us as well as legislators, that we have not done or have not followed the same protocols that we set up in the system as well. So part of what we need to look at is the recommendations Ms. McCartney and others will make for modifications to the law as we want to, if we choose to continue, but also we may need to strengthen, if we think it's a good thing, maybe need to strengthen the requirements on us as well. So for example, if there is a requirement that a report be written and for whatever reason it's not requested, then do we need to put in statute that bill doesn't move? So we need to again, at the end of the day, the report is a recommendation. We can choose to accept it or reject it, but to move forward absence any report at all, which we have done in an occasion or two, may or may not be, in the citizens of Georgia's best interest. And if we've set up a system that suggests we ought to have these reports, then maybe we need to tighten up on our end as well.
And I can only speak since I've been the OPB director, but any time that we have received a request from the legislature, we have completed the review.
Oh, yeah, and absolutely, don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting whenever you were requested that you've
Yeah.
failed to do. That's, yeah, I think there's been an opportunity where there probably wasn't a request and a bill made it through. But that's a different, that's for us to decide whether or not we want to continue to leave that gap in the law where it could be threaded if so chosen. And again, at the end of the day, this is a recommendation that the legislature still maintains the authority to accept or reject, to license or not, regardless of what the recommendation is. But the question is, do we find this information valuable? Is it helpful to have prior to making these decisions? Or is there information that we would find valuable that's not required to be in the reports? Do we need to consider expanding the required information? Or conversely, is there stuff in the reports that just really doesn't lead you to make a decision one way or the other, that we can reduce the burden on the staff to go out and get? Let me introduce real quick, if we can just pause for 1 second. Representative Karen Bennett has joined us, and she texted me a few minutes ago and said she wished this was a transportation hearing. But I've asked each member just to briefly introduce himself and state if they hold any, or mention to the group if they hold any state license. And you're going to be number 19, is that correct? Let me ask you to do that for.
Good morning again, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Karen Bennett, representing parts of DeKalb County and Gwinnett, and I do hold a state license under the Board of Physical Therapy.
Thank you. Okay. Any other final questions from Ms. McCartney?
I do have one other.
Yes, ma'am.
Just kind of thought around the boards and the Secretary of State. I would just ask, when the legislature looks at moving boards on the licensing, that they really look through the budget part of that. And the reality is, what we have found is when we start moving the boards, it's kind of the common, and again, that's just my perspective, the common theme is, oh, it won't cost us any more money. We're good. We just move us and go attach us to this other agency. But that's very rarely the case. And when you start moving things between agencies, there is a cost. And I get this is a little bit of a different thing of, when you start moving, you can't make an assumption that another agency, when you administratively attach to them, can cover part of the cost. You have to look at the fund sources, what restrictions they have on their fund sources. We have the same issue around the Holocaust Museum. We moved that from Secretary of State over to DCA. The problem is DCA can only do certain things because they utilize federal funds. So again, it's just when you start moving, really look at all of potentially the unintended consequences of that.
And thank you. You've generated another question. Representative LaRicchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you have to be careful. No, I just,
again, that's
before
just
you
my
get away, just keeps ringing in my mind. You mentioned that OPB had 80 some odd staff in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be fair? Somewhere
Yes.
around. And today, 40 something.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember, in 04, 05, 06, somewhere in there, we were at about a 18 to a $20 billion budget.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're at 26 point something.
Mm-hmm.
How, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important would it be that we try to make sure you have the people that you need to be able to do the job that, quite frankly, we may add to? I don't know what we will do, but I know that that your office does a lot. And what would you think that number would, just kind of thinking out loud, what do you think that number would need to be? 50? 60? I mean, just be honest with us, because I think the cost benefit is a huge factor, because if we're not performing the way that this state would expect us to perform, then investing in other positions could be a return, a greater return on that investment or what we do. Where should we be?
You know, I've had the opportunity to work in the state of Georgia in government for 17 years. So you can only imagine 3 administrations. I've seen a lot and understand things tend to go up and down, and it's always cyclical. I will tell you, I don't think OPB ever should be back at the 80. We have changed how we do business, and it's not a negative, it's a positive of streamlining, utilizing technology. And so what we're able to do more today than we used to do in the early 2000s. I will tell you, whoever is the next OPB director come January, they're going to have a tremendous amount of flexibility in their budget, because again, things that we were able to accomplish in the last year, we changed our budgeting system and ended up saving a tremendous amount of money there. And so I think the next person has the ability to now hire additional staff without you having to add resources. And we just got to that point. I wish I would have gotten there a little earlier, because then I would have had an opportunity to staff up. I think there's greater needs in other agencies that should be the legislature's priority. I think OPB has a very healthy budget that we can do more now, just given technology. So we're going to get there. Probably not what you thought I was going to say.
Sounds good.
You can give it to the other agencies behind me.
One more now, Ms. Representative Bennett.
You did prompt a question. When you talk about the cost of moving boards, just for my personal information, is the cost on the receiving end or on the delivery end, and what types of costs are associated with it?
It could be both. It is about how Secretary of State is economies of scale of having the certain boards and how they're providing administrative back offices. And obviously they can talk more about that. It's when you start moving boards to other agencies, if they were utilizing certain IT systems that now you're having to recreate at a new agency. If like I said, the back office of that new agency can't provide some of the supports because they have restrictions on how they utilize their funds, that's going to be a cost. I mean, it could be a number of issues, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you every time you move a board it's going to cost more money. I just want the legislature to understand that there is that potential, and really understanding, in a sense, all of those unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me. All right, now we're going to have a representative from the Secretary of State's office come forward. We're going to talk a little bit with the licensing division, and I believe Lisa, our director, is going to present for us. Again, we expect that's kind of a similar type of discussion and overview to get. We're just trying to build our foundation for today's meeting on how we might look at these issues going forward. And you've been very kind to submit detailed information to the members of the committee. I hope all committee members received a number of PDF files and lots of different information from the Secretary of State's office and the Business License Division. And so with that, we'll open the floor to you, Ms. Durden.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Lisa Durden, and I am the director for the Professional Licensing Boards Division in Macon. We provide administrative support to 41 professional licensing boards and advisory groups in Macon. I have provided a lot of information to you, and I'm not going to read all of that. I know you're glad to hear that. But over time, we have noticed some things, even with some boards that have left our agency, accountancy and pharmacy and dental. As you look at our fact sheet that I provided, that was one of the first pages. For instance, like in 2014, with all of those boards still there, we received 51,202 applications that year. Well, even with those boards leaving, as you notice, each year since then, our numbers have continued to increase for the number of applications that we've received and the number of licenses that we've issued. In FY 2018, we received 66,577 applications, and we issued 51,319 licenses. And our average processing time is now 17 days. And that's versus where we were back in 2012, where we were at 21 days. In 2013, we were at 93 days. There were things that happened along that time that increased our processing times. We needed a new IT system. The General Assembly passed the immigration law, which required that we obtain an SVD, an affidavit, from every single person who applied for a license and who renewed a license. And so it took us about 2.5 years to obtain that information from everybody who currently held a license. And since that time, we get that information from people who apply for licenses now. So also during that time, we improved our IT systems. We worked with our vendor system automation and upgraded all of our network system and our software systems in order to help provide better services. Because just like every other state agency, we had to take the economic hits that everyone else did. And we lost a portion of our staff, during those years. But with our help with IT resources and, adding some more staff along the way since then, as funds have allowed, we've been able to improve our processing times overall and help people get to work faster, which is one of our goals. Our primary goals are to provide administrative support to the licensing boards and helping carry out their board meetings, to help provide administrative support and helping issue licenses to people who apply for a license. We want people who are qualified applicants to get to work as quickly as we can, and that's our goal there. And also to help provide consumer protection. We receive a number of complaints every year, each board does, and we're tasked with helping the boards process those complaints, investigate those complaints where it's needed, and then process those board orders as boards issue them. And so those are the types of things that we're responsible for. All of the fees and fines that we receive from applications and renewals and fines and so forth are sent to the General Treasury. We don't get to keep those funds. Those are sent to the General Treasury. All licensees renew their licenses every 2 years, with the exception of cemeteries who renew their licenses annually. Some of the other things that we help the boards with are the rules promulgation process. Each board has to go through a series of steps in order to pass or amend a rule that they have, or if they want to create a new rule. And once those rules have been voted on by the board and voted to pass, or, however they want to do that, then because of the North Carolina dentistry case, those rules then get referred to the governor's office for final approval before they're put into place. So there's a lot of that goes into the picture. We have 7 executive directors who provide administrative support to the boards that we have in place. We have them divided into groups. We have 3 healthcare groups and 4 trades groups. And each executive director has their own staff, licensing analysts and complaints and compliance people to help provide administrative support to those boards. And the information that I've given you has that breakdown of who has what and how the boards are divided. We try to divide them into groups that have similar things going on. For example, Stacy Price has healthcare too, and those are ATs, PTs, OTs, podiatrists, massage therapists, chiropractors, and veterinarians. So those are all groups that touch people or animals, kind of thing. And then Briggs Zimmerman has psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, all of those groups that provide counseling kinds of services to people. So, we've sort of broken them down that way so that the EDs have some similar topics to work with, and because some of those things, some of the laws that surround some of those groups are similar, and the rules are similar, and it's just easier to keep those groups together that way. so that staff can work together with those boards to provide the best services possible. Just to remind everybody, in 2014, we've had some help from the General Assembly over the years with trying to streamline services, in addition to upgrading our IT systems and so forth. In 2014, you voted to combine the RN and LPN boards. Those were two separate boards, and we were doing separate functions for those boards, like separate web pages, separate meetings, separate minutes, separate complaints processes and all of that. And so when those boards combined, it helped streamline those services, and it also allowed the LPNs and RNs to work closely together to make sure that they were, communicating about how nursing services were provided in the state of Georgia. You did the same thing with barbers and cosmetology in 2015, and now that's one group that works together to provide services to Georgia. So those things have been helpful to us. They've helped us to be able to streamline services. It's helped our call center with being able to answer questions for people who call about, which type of license did they need to get and that kind of thing. So those are things that have happened along the way to help us provide better services in Georgia. Mandatory reporting was also passed it became effective in 2014, and that was for nurses, so that all healthcare providers are required to report any type of, problems with nurses, like with stealing drugs or using drugs on the job and those types of things, so that the boards can deal with that. So those types of things have increased our complaints and compliance caseload, but is providing data that the nursing board needed to help enforce cases in Georgia. And so that's sort of a big overview of what we do, and Lori was going to talk about the budget part of things.
Good morning. I'm Lori Smith. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Secretary of State's office. So to kind of, piggyback on what Lisa's already said, some efficiencies that we did in 2015, amended 15 FY16 budget, we worked with Teresa and her group at OPB, and they actually gave us $1 million that helped with our performance measures that we present each year. So in the $1 million, we took $500,000 and put it towards creating a new trade group within PLB. So prior to 2016, there were 3 healthcare groups and 3 trade groups. So we broke away some of the trades and created a 4th trade group, which created a lot of efficiencies within PLB itself and looking at those performance measures. Then we took the other $500,000 that we received from the legislators and put that into our call center and created a call center group specifically for nursing. And those have also allowed us to create efficiencies. So if you look at 2018, where we are now, in the 66,000 application that Lisa mentioned, and processing them in 17 days, we were at one point processing them in 66 days. So those, tremendously helped us in those services. We also, for our call center, we do have a corporations related call center and PLB related call center. They work together. So if we're in a renewal season, all the call center will be focused on PLB and then focused on corporations when needed. But our hold times have went to 30 seconds from 2 minutes and 44 seconds compared to adding those resources. So those were just some things that we wanted to point out. And as Teresa mentioned earlier, with the transition of boards leaving us, I think it's important to point out that while PLB is a big group, there's administrative support there that supports the analyst and the trade groups getting these licensed processed, and that's the intake and the call center piece that are oftentimes forgot about when agencies or groups move from our agency to another agency. Sometimes the agencies that receive the trades are not equipped to do the professional call support and intake that's allowed there. So just something else to caveat from what she said earlier.
I'll just touch on a couple of other things. Last year, we received almost 312,000 calls at PLB. So that's a lot, and that's, you know, those were just calls for PLB, not just the other groups too. So we do have a good economy of scale system at PLB. You know, you're housing 41 boards in one building, paying one rent, one light bill, you know, and we all work together to make things work. We have a renewal coordinator who helps set up the renewals for all of the boards. So each group is not having to do that individually and those types of things. So we do work off that. The one intake system for mailroom and intake, where all the mail is brought in and scanned to the appropriate sections for them to work, and those sorts of things.
Very good. Thank you. And let me mention, too, once we, in future meetings, when we open to public comment and industry comment, this committee is not considering any unlicensed profession that wants to be licensed. We're not considering any profession that wants to move from one agency or another. That's outside the scope of what we will be discussing. So I appreciate the comments with regard to cost and any shifting and so forth, but just so that you're aware, as well as those that are joining us in the public. Let me go back to and talk a little bit about the act of the legislature a few years ago with regard to secure and verifiable documents. And as I pointed out to the members of the committee earlier, sometimes the challenges our state departments face are our own making, and the bill was, I think, and the step was a valuable thing for us to do and something that was needed. We don't always think about the ripple effect. So I'm born and raised right here in Georgia, 57 years old, and I could have held a license for 25 or 30 years. And all of a sudden, the legislature passes a bill. I could have been operating in the same building for 30 years, and now you want me to send, a copy of my birth certificate? And, so imagine from how many different licensees now, in the state?
Well, we currently have about 500,000 active licensees.
So you had again, perhaps a good step by the legislature or a good piece of legislation, something that was necessary. We also needed to realize that 500,000 license holders now are going to, and many of whom have had the same license for year after year, are going to have to submit additional documentation they haven't submitted before. And that's going to not only slow down the system, but imagine the calls it generates, the aggravation from someone that's been licensed for a number of years to have to, hell, I was born right here in Atlanta. What do you mean prove that I'm not, I'm a citizen of Georgia? I've never lived anywhere else. But, again, so we need to just always be conscious of the ramifications of our actions and how that impacts our state departments. And it probably took, 18, 24 months to get through that?
Close to 2 years, because you had licensees who renewed every other year, so we were having to hit people at renewal time. So.
And I'm sure some of that delay and some of the peaks in calls occurred as a result of that legislation and the new requirements, and then that's what we're seeing trailing off now, and you're getting back to quicker call times and quicker responses and so forth. Okay, very good. Let me move on to how are complaints triggered within a particular licensee or particular industry? What triggers a complaint?
Consumers can submit complaints online, or like with nursing, the employers do. Sometimes other employers with other license types submit complaints, but they can be submitted online. We also accept them through email or fax, or if somebody just wants to snail mail one in, we will receive complaints and process them. But we do require that people submit a written complaint so that we have a starting
So you
point.
receive a written complaint, and it's funneled to the particular trade executive director,
Yes,
I
sir.
presume.
To the appropriate section, and it's logged into the system. And then that complaint is then reviewed by, typically, this is how it works. It'll be read by the staff and then reviewed to the appropriate. Most boards have like a complaints review committee or a cognizant member who will review the complaint and then make a recommendation for how to sort of start the process. They'll either say, you know, I'll recommend or will recommend that this be dismissed as frivolous, or it needs immediate attention, it needs to be investigated immediately. We want it to go ahead and be investigated. Or sometimes they may want to wait and let the whole board review it before they decide how they want to proceed with it. And that's sort of how it starts. Just depends on the nature of the complaint.
If the complaint comes in that would include something of a criminal nature, how is it handled differently? Or is it?
Again, the board, you know, a board member would need to review it and make a decision, and they can refer it to investigations, and they may decide to refer it to an outside criminal investigation, you know, a local law enforcement. They do have the ability to do that.
Is it possible that a citizen could be the victim of a criminal act, and the citizen, for whatever reason, report through your system rather than going directly to law enforcement, and that act never be referred to law enforcement? Should the board or the various reviews choose not to?
I'm not sure about that. I think if it was something, I mean, I think in most cases that the boards would want to find out if law enforcement was involved. But I can't answer that question
So,
specifically.
but the board would be making that
That
determination.
decision.
So the excuse me. In the rules promulgation process, again, you've referred to the North Carolina case, which basically dealt with a delegation of authority, I guess, right? So ultimately, there, you know, it has to flow back to a government, in this case, the governor, having responsibility and authority over the rules adopted by the various boards. But the boards are providing, are handling that up until the final approval. That is, they're making a determination based on a number of factors, what is a modification of their industry practices that they feel is worthy. And then they're going through a series of hearings or what have you to adopt those rules and changes. And then once they've finalized them in some draft form, then at that point, your group, I'm sure, has participated throughout that process, but then at that point, you forward it back to someone in the executive branch for final approval?
Yes, sir. The you know, the notice to adopt the rule, the board's vote, the minutes, the transcript of the rules hearing, and the AG's authority are all forwarded to the governor's office for review.
In each of these board meetings, and when you mentioned AG, it reminded me that, so in each of these various board meetings, your staff is present,
Yes, sir.
and a member of the AG's office is typically present as well.
Yes, sir. Each board is assigned an attorney from the AG's office to represent that board.
Are there, and presuming with 41 different boards under your purview, you probably have some that operate a little differently than others, and some that probably take a little more of the workload than others. But are there modifications? Does opportunity exist to push down more of the administrative function of these boards to the boards and the industries themselves? I mean, all this administration that we're providing, that the Secretary of State's office is providing, that the Attorney General's office is providing, I mean, are there opportunities to modify the system where more of that administrative burden could be pushed down to the industry and still meet, I guess, our primary objective of protecting the public?
That I'm not sure how to answer. I guess you'd have to look specifically at what the issue is, and you know, is it something? Are you talking about like associations within the industry, or?
Well, again, I'm seeing, reading some reports that certain areas have, for lack of a better word, independent boards, and a board within an industry operates with some autonomy of the state regulating their industry. And then there remains state oversight. There would have to be state in addition to oversight, there would have to be penalties that the state could impose for bad behavior or what have you. But it removes much of the, the administrative burden from, having to have as much of the state involved. So,
Well, I do know that in some other states, there are a lot of independent boards, and that cost is significantly more than the system that we
the
have.
cost
in
is
place.
significantly more to the industry itself, to who not to the state.
Well, we had Alabama that contacted us, it's been several years ago, and they had all of their boards, they had similarly about the same number of boards that we regulate in that state, and each of those operated independently. And at that time, their cost to their state was $43 million. And I know this because the guy from the governor's office over there called and talked to me about it. And at that point, our cost was between $7 and $8 million. And so our cost was significantly less than that state with all those independent boards operating.
In Georgia today, I mean, you're, and as you heard with discussion earlier with Ms. McCartney from OPB about, how we budget funds, and we'll talk about that with your office as well in just a moment. But significantly more funds are received by the state than are appropriated for your administration of all these licensing boards. And so from a taxpayer standpoint, an individual taxpayer, is it correct to say that we're not bearing any of the burden of the operation of these boards?
Let Lori.
So for the budget itself, each year we remit $18 million to Treasury that are either license fees and fines. And then of what it costs to operate, we're right at $8.5 million for operations, if that answers your question.
Yeah. So the industry professionals in the various licensed industries, their cost of licensure or fines or what have you, that they remit to the state, exceed the cost of the services that we're providing. Therefore, an individual taxpayer that I'm not licensed in any profession, my tax dollars are not covering any of the cost of licensure.
Exactly.
Okay. And you think, even in Alabama, in your example earlier, with a significantly higher cost, in that example, we also believe that the industry is incurring that cost. The taxpayers of Alabama, individual taxpayers in Alabama that aren't in any way licensed, are not incurring that cost. Is that correct?
That was my understanding.
Okay.
Their fees were paying for it.
All right, let me shut up for a minute, let a few others join in. Representative Lott?
Thank you. So I do have just a couple questions, but first I'd like to say thank you as well for your leadership. As a registered nurse and working through your process, I know that you had some tough times back in the recession, as did all of our departments in the state, and you have made significant improvements, not only documented in the paperwork that you forwarded us and the numbers that we can see, but certainly by my own experience, and I appreciate that. But that being said, and I know many changes and improvements have come, do you feel as though there is consideration for maybe some of these changes to continue, and is there something that the legislature can do for you in regards to, you made reference to that every license is every 2 years? So this is, you don't feel like you have to answer this, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, but do you have an opinion as to whether that is necessary for every license that we have? Maybe it is more important that the pharmacists or the nurses are licensed every 2 years, but maybe not other industries, or vice versa for that matter. So just to put that out there for you, are there other changes that you see that we can help with that may improve some of your efficiency?
Yeah, I think we've that topic has come up, in the past. And it's just, I think, there would need to be some research done to determine, which boards you may want to change, or if that's an avenue that the General Assembly wants to pursue.
I think some that you could like consider, maybe some that just require registrations that are not licenses. For example, we register librarians. So maybe that could be a one-time registration fee, and then they're registered for life. Or, you know, some kind of combination to consider.
Of the 41, what are you considering a registration and what are you considering a license?
Well, there are some that are registrations. I'm trying to think of what, like athlete agents are registrations. Immigration services are registrations. So, you know, there's some that fall into those categories.
And is there a different requirement on them? Do they register every 2 years? Do they re-register?
Immigration does not. It's a one-time thing. Athlete agents do. Everything else is
every 2
renewing every
years.
2 years.
Okay. Thank you.
And does registration tend to suggest there's no board
There is a
administered?
board.
There is a
Well,
board.
there's not for athlete agents, and there's not for immigration, but all of the other groups have a board or an advisory group, like lactation consultants and music therapists have an advisory group that's assigned.
24, Representative Williams.
Thank you. And thank you again for all your hard work. And from personal experience, I know what a great job y'all do. Is it possible that the boards that do not require continuing education, that those boards could be renewed every 5 years or change the renewal?
That's something that
Yeah.
y'all would have to review and determine.
But thank you for your report. Very thorough. Thank you very much.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you. Just to go back to the registration entities, how many are there that are registered with the Secretary of State's office?
It's just a couple, athlete agents and immigration services. Trying to look at the list. Those are the only two that I can.
Okay,
Can
thank you.
think
And the
of
reason
right
for
off
my
the-
questioning, since you did bring it up, the licensure boards, Secretary of State is there to protect the public, and I was just wondering if there were any registrations that are given that may also be of entities that would, there would be a consideration that there may be some harm to the public.
Are you saying? I'm not sure I
For
understand the
the,
question.
for the, those entities that are registered only,
Mm-hmm.
compared to the professions that are licensed,
Mm-hmm.
there's licensure oversight to protect the public.
Yes, ma'am.
And so those entities that are registered only, are there any threats to the public with those that are registered?
Well, we have had some complaints about immigration services, more along the lines of unlicensed practice and that kind of thing, and those have been investigated. With athlete agents, I think there's a page on that one. I don't think we've had any complaints about them in a long time. Let's see if I can find their page. Yeah, athlete agents haven't had any complaints since 2011, so we haven't received any.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have missed this. If I did, I apologize. But when you were talking about complaints earlier and how they're handled, and if it's a possibility that it could be adversely affecting someone, if a board has met, say, today, and all of a sudden you get a complaint tomorrow that comes in, does that wait until the board's next meeting, or can you call executive session and poll the board members of that particular board? Would you do that, or would you just put that complaint in the hopper and wait till the next meeting and put it on the agenda then?
Well, again, that's why we have the process of having cognizance and investigative community meetings between board meetings. So if it's something that's very serious and egregious type of complaint, then we would certainly go ahead and have a board member review it and make a determination. If the board member felt like it was something that needed to be addressed quickly, we could hold an additional teleconference or meeting with the board to see if it, if they needed some emergency action or some immediate action regarding that complaint. And that does happen.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Ms. Durden, thank you so much, and appreciate your presentation as well. Now, let's talk just for a moment. As you heard earlier, a couple of recommendations from OPB with flexibility on their reports and a few other suggestions on maybe extending the timing or what have you. In looking at the efficient board operations and funding with your department, are there some areas that could improve that with the legislative assistance and some things that we may need to do that would allow you to improve? And just to share with you from where I sit, sometimes I serve on regulated industries, and I mean, I just feel like a referee sometimes, just trying to decide whether somebody needs a red card or a yellow card in industry fights, and it's just that's beyond my ability to understand all the little nuances of why one person's not happy with another. But are there means to, and I hear a lot from the public. I mean, one of the things, and I'm sure all of us receive, is phone calls from constituents that have one problem or another. And it surprises me how often when I make one phone call or send one email, and the problem is just solved very quickly. And on the one hand, it makes me feel glad I was able to help someone, but on the other hand, it actually frustrates me and upsets me a little bit. The person's been struggling for a period of time, and just because somebody gets an email with a state rep's signature on it, problem solved. And so are there ways that that you would be willing to recommend or share that we could consider that would improve board administration, board operations, board efficiency, and again, focus solely on the two populations of one, that practitioner that's just out there trying to earn a living, and number two, of course, the consumer, that our ultimate responsibility is to them to make sure that they're receiving services in a safe environment.
Well, I think Lori and I were talking about this earlier. We were under the impression, or we've been notified that the governor's office is giving our agency and other agencies too 2% additional 2% additional
Funding.
Resources this year. And so what we plan to do with that is to hire some additional analysts to help us process faster. As I mentioned that the application numbers have gone up and the licensure numbers have gone up. And while we have made improvements to technology, we plan to use those resources to hire more analysts to help us process things more quickly.
Okay. So, the additional analysts and additional funding, which you're about to receive some, is the key area where, and give me an idea of what the kind of work that an analyst will do. So you have an analyst, you're going to be assigned to one of these working groups, one of the 7 divisions, I presume. And so they're working with a number of licenses that are in a similar group. Mm-hmm. And what is it that this analyst is looking at?
They review the applications when they come in, and they check to see if the person meets the minimum qualifications. With some license types, we have the administrative authority from the boards to administratively approve applications that don't have any issues with them. The person passed the test, they have their degree, they don't have any criminal history or anything like that, and so we can issue the license. With some groups, the board members or the boards review the applications. So the analyst has to review that application, check to see which requirements have been met, and then which are all or which ones have, and then they'll forward those applications to the board to review. They'll be placed on the board's agenda for the next meeting, or placed on the agenda for some board members to review between meetings. It just depends on how that particular board operates. And so, once the board then makes a decision, then the analyst will move forward with either making the person eligible to sit for the exam or issuing the license. But they handle all that paperwork in the process of trying to get, people licensed through the process.
So if there are statutory requirements for minimum requirements to seek licensure, and that is present on an application that's verifiable, why have some boards chosen not to allow your analyst to verify that? And secondly, what is it that they're looking for if everything is present? What would lead that board to make a determination different than yours, which would be approval if all those requirements are met?
Some boards, and I'm not going to get into all of them,
Right.
but an example, some of the construction industry boards want to review the applications to look at the work experience to determine whether or not they feel like it meets the minimum requirements. They'll look at the, like for heating and air, to see what type of work the person has done and whether or not they feel it meets the requirements of the law, so that the person can sit for the exam.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, sir. What you just said, would that be license renewal or new license?
New licenses.
New licenses,
Yes.
okay.
Almost all of the renewals are done online. Over, I think it was like 90% of the licensees renew online. That's a simple process. They go online, they, update their contact information, answer the questions related to that renewal, and pay their fee and submit. And as long as there's no problem with the answers that they submitted, for instance, if you haven't been arrested or convicted since you last renewed, if you've completed your CE and those types of things, then the renewals just continue to process. And if it doesn't, like if you said that you had an arrest or a conviction, then that renewal would be flagged and we would have to do something else with that.
Follow up. Thank you. In renewing applications, I know, for instance, back years ago, when the budget crunch, where the Secretary of State's office used to send out cards reminding people to get their license renewed, it didn't happen, so a lot of people, their license lapsed. They were fined for operating without a license. And, I'd brought that up to the funeral board before, and I was told, well, to go get your license renewed. Well, matter of fact, I got a postcard telling me my driver's license has got to be renewed. But the Secretary of State's office still does not send out postcards after their people's license have renewed or failed to renew.
Well, we focus our energy on the front end, trying to get people to renew.
Yeah.
We're not obligated by law to send out reminders, but we do it as a courtesy. And we'll send out several email reminders during the renewal period. If that particular board has a professional association that works with those licensees, we'll notify the professional associations and ask them to renew their memberships. We do press releases and all types of things. If someone does not have an email address on file with us, then we will send a courtesy postcard to them, reminding them to renew. But that's part of the efficiency, that we've had to do over time due to budget cuts and that kind of thing. That's seems to be working, for the vast majority of people. And if you can see, notice that most all people are renewing online, and all people are taking advantage of it. I feel like it's working well.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Representative Bennett.
Follow up, Mr. Durden. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With all of your license renewals, is it not consistent? Is it consistent that on the current license there is a end date?
An expiration date?
Expiration
Yes,
date.
ma'am.
On all licenses, you have a from and expiration date.
Yes, ma'am.
So that every licensee would know when their license expires.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And it's also online on the My Verification site. anyone can go online and look up their license at any time and see their expiration date. And any member of the public can as well.
Have your analysts compared the population of license applications that you administratively approve to the population of license applications that the boards approve to determine any advantage or disadvantage to doing one way or the other, any more or less complaints one way or the other, any other factors that would lead one to make a determination that it's absolutely no difference whether it's done one way or the other. It improves service if it's done this way rather than that. Have y'all looked at comparing those at all?
Well, certainly we can issue a license faster if our staff has the administrative authority to review the license and process it.
And so under that population that's getting their licenses quicker, are we seeing any higher incidence of complaints or sanctions or anything such as that would suggest that maybe, or have y'all looked at that kind of analysis yet?
No, but I mean, that's something that
we
can
do that.
suggest or look at.
Any other questions from the members of, thank you so much. Anything else that you would like to add, any recommendations or parting words of wisdom? We could certainly use it.
No, we appreciate you taking the time to review what we do and listen to us and to help better understand what we do. I'm available if any of you have any questions, just let me know. I think all of you at some point have called me or contacted me,
Right.
and I'll be happy to talk with you.
Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, board members, we've, again, you've received significant information prior to our hearing, and I've been reviewing it, but the information we received is quite detailed and quite lengthy, and I'm sure I certainly could use a little more time reviewing all that information. And I would like to suggest that we take that information we've received, where, in addition to the input we received today, and begin formulating, some kind of questions and ideas around both the occupational review process as well as the licensing process. And then what we're going to do is we'll schedule a second hearing, and at that second hearing what I would like us to do is to hear from industry professionals, those licensed professions or anyone that would. And let me say at this point too, we are currently looking at those 41 licenses that are attached to the Secretary of State's office. We are not going to be looking at or taking testimony from any of those licensed professions that are not directly attached to the Secretary of State's office within the purview of this particular committee. And then what we'll do, that'll be our next meeting. And I would ask those of you in the various professions, if you would like to share information and at our next meeting, if you would let us know, and you can contact my assistant Jan Brown or David, and let us know that you would like to testify and present information about your profession. And that way it'll help us schedule the size of the room, the time that we will need for a meeting. And again, please keep in mind what we're interested in hearing is both with regard to that initial regulatory review process through GORC, the 7-year updates, what kind of information would be valuable for legislators to receive through that process. If you think it's valuable at all, you're certainly free to say it ought to be disbanded. And then secondly, with regard to the Secretary of State's office, the operation of the board, efficient operation of the board, the licensing fees, the allocation of funding, what your profession might need to better serve the community of licensees as well as the general public. So we're going to keep the discussion narrow on those kind of two issues. We're not looking for testimony from somebody who's unlicensed and wants their profession to be licensed. We're not going to take testimony from anybody that is currently licensed with one department or agency and wants to move to another department or agency. We're not going to take any testimony on scope of service between various existing licensees. That's all outside the purview of what this committee is going to hear. But if you'll let either David or Jan know of your desire to participate at the next meeting, we'll make sure we have you on the agenda and schedule enough time to do that. And then the following meeting after that Once we'll take a little time to digest that information from the industry, then we'll open it up and like to hear from individual practitioners or the general public on what their experience has been and ways they see that we could improve service and efficiency and protect the public. So members of the committee, any final comment? Does that sound reasonable to everyone? If so, then we will adjourn this first hearing. I thank you all for coming.